I was professionally and personally just zapped, totally burned out. Thought that I might actually step away from clinical medicine. I needed to focus on my own health. I needed to refill my own cup. And it has been a really, in many ways, a slow but fast evolution since that time.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. And today we're joined by Dr. Wada, quadruple board certified pediatric and adult allergy, immunology, and lifestyle medicine physician, who also happens to have Sjögrens. In today's conversation, we discuss the differences between allergy, autoimmunity, immune deficiency, and cancer, as well as what might be driving the ever-growing incidence of these health challenges. I would love for you to share with listeners and me a little more about your personal journey, not just with, why are you quadruple board certified, but your wellness journey, your personal journey, and what has led you to this world that you are now just totally rocking.
So about 4 years ago is when I was diagnosed with systemic Sjögrens. At that point, I was 2 years into my, full-fledged allergy immunology practice. I was just back from maternity leave from having my second child. And I was at a bit of a crossroads because I thought at that point in time, I was so exhausted. I was professionally and personally just zapped, totally burned out, and thought that I might actually step away from clinical medicine. I dropped my clinics, like the number of clinics and time that I was in clinic, by half, and really realized that I needed to focus on my own health. I needed to refill my own cup. And it has been a really, in many ways, a slow but fast evolution since that time. And I think I continue to just peel back the layers like an onion and realizing how, even though at the time I was only triple board certified, I guess, but at the time that education that I had really did not prepare me for, one, living in the role of a patient, nor did it really, like the education I received on Sjogren's really did not reflect at all the lived experience of Sjogren's. And I think did not help me all that much in realizing that was what was going on with my own health. Because in hindsight, I actually had symptoms that, was it full-blown Sjogren's or not at that time? Who knows? And it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But I had symptoms that I now recognize as related in some way or prodrome back to when I was in college in my late teens, early 20s. And I was well into my mid-30s when I was diagnosed. What I will share, with folks within the patient community, and actually I just wrote an article for Kevin MD on this as well that we'll publish tomorrow. But what we learn about Sjogren's in medical education is how to answer the question on your boards correctly, which is they're going to describe a postmenopausal woman. She's coming in complaining of a gritty sensation in her eyes. You notice on physical exam that she has poor dentition, poor teeth. And then you have some lab data to say that her blood work shows that she has this antibody SSA positive. And then you circle the question. You're like, oh, yes, I got it.
Done. I don't ever have to
Yes.
think about Sjögrens again.
Correct. Or if you're a pediatrician, this will come up in the SSA antibody can cause congenital heart block. So that will be the question that you learn is, did baby has congenital heart block? And then the question may ask, what was wrong on mom's lab work? But here's the reality. And here, thinking back of the puzzle pieces of symptoms I've had over the years, a lot of digestive distress. So, symptoms that we describe as irritable bowel, but really wicked stomach aches, migraine headaches, profound fatigue, back stiffness, that I actually do recall going and kind of seeing a primary care about at one point during my medical training, which must have been pretty significant because as residents, like resident physicians, you never go to the doctor because you don't have time, and you're trying to take care of yourself. We're the worst patient. So it must have been pretty bad. I had an episode of idiopathic anaphylaxis after having my first child. And I also over time realized that I couldn't wear mascara without looking like a raccoon because I was always touching my eyes, rubbing my eyes. Wasn't able to tolerate wearing contacts at a certain point because of the dry eye.
Sure.
Yeah. And what is fascinating, especially as I now clinically am seeing patients, no one ever comes in with this, their main complaint of dry eyes or dry mouth.
Right.
They're complaining about their dry cough or their body pain, their fatigue. Maybe their sinus issues because I'm an allergist by trade, right? So they're coming to see me for their sinus stuff. And the other reality is that 30 to 40% of patients have totally normal labs.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally normal labs. So, they get that, oh, your labs are normal.
Must be in your head.
Must be normal. Yeah. Let's try this antidepressant, or maybe you should try losing a few pounds. So all that to say that, this, and it's been the patient community that has welcomed me and embraced me that I've learned so much more from than, those several $100,000 I spent in my education. Now, granted, learned some other things along the way too. But so once I was diagnosed, and I will say I feel incredibly fortunate, and seems odd to say, but my labs were totally wacky and bad. They were terrible at the time. I think it took my my rheumatologist / friend by surprise. Had those not been abnormal, I don't know how long it would have taken me to be diagnosed.
There's so many parts and pieces of your story that I'm like, oh, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I want to first just kind of reinforce, because I have this conversation with clients a lot, that because standard Western medical training doesn't teach about how to, they don't teach about gut health. They don't teach about how to heal autoimmunity, how to, reduce inflammation, all of the things. And so I know that by the time people find me, and probably you, they're frustrated because
absolutely
they had normal labs. They were offered antidepressants. They were searching and searching. And so I want to highlight that part of your journey, and every other physician that has been on here that has, an autoimmune journey or a health recovery journey, is that it's not, I said this yesterday, nobody becomes a doctor if they don't want to help people. And somebody said, well, that's not true. I said, oh, there's easier ways to make money. I promise. But it's the education system has to change, as we have information, and this is where integrative medicine, functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, whatever you want to call it, is key. And I love you touched on and I think this is really important for people. You kind of said it, but didn't say it. Like, it doesn't matter if you have a diagnosis or when you get the diagnosis, this idea of we ignore and normalize symptoms. And if we don't hear the whispers, we will get shouts. And that's what happens.
Yes, absolutely.
And, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like, a shocker, your autoimmunity, you used to have gut issues. No way,
Yeah.
There's a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think part of it, I will refer to myself as the ostrich with their head in the sand for a long time. I
think that's
I was totally in denial. But also like, I didn't have time to be sick. Now that I say that, but then it's a little like tongue in cheek because there would be afternoons where I was totally incapacitated because I ate something that didn't sit well, or I had a terrible headache, or I was just totally zapped from really overdoing it. And so I was forced to take rest, right?
That's what happens
because of symptoms, and that's what your body needs and is like demanding at that point.
Yeah. Which is so true. I had a client last week who was very sick, like, ER, had a really high D-dimer, like a scary moment in time where, and 2 days later, she was like complaining that she was still sick. And I'm like, are you in bed? Well, no, I'm working. And I'm like, yeah, like, you're not going to get better if you don't rest. And especially when we've got these chronic, whether it's autoimmune or not, just these chronic symptoms, we do tend to just ignore and try to push through. And our body will always take us down if we're not going to give it the rest that it wants, for sure. So I want to touch on, because there's just, again, so many questions I want to ask you. You have this whole host of symptoms that you've experienced, and this is what you're seeing in your other patients with Sjogren's, is this, because it sounded like, I always think by the time you get the really dry eye, there was always this other host of things. And so is that what you're seeing is, it doesn't, I don't know. I don't want to offend you. I don't know you well enough yet. But to me, it's like, it's it all comes back to the same stuff when we're talking about autoimmunity. And so I don't care if, the Sjogren's was one of the things they threw, that was like my 5th diagnosis. As things just progressed. And it's like, I don't care what name they gave what you have. Like, let's just go after what's going on here. Why? Let's answer the question why, and then we can start shedding some of those labels. But it sounds like that's accurate. You see almost the same host.
Yeah. And the data supports that too. The other symptom that I left off the list is dysautonomia, or POTS, is incredibly common in Sjogren's. It's the number one autoimmune cause of POTS. And although I don't, as far as I know, I haven't had, I wear my Oura ring and some of my trackers, so I don't think POTS is going on, but I have had significant issues with orthostatic, like intolerance. And I would have to scrub out of surgery as a medical student because in that hot, especially, it wasn't so much an issue on the actual surgery rotation, but on the OBGYN rotation, where they keep the room much warmer for the babies that are, about to be born. I had to scrub out on multiple occasions because I think in hindsight, combination of prolonged sitting or standing, the warm environment, all those things kind of came into play where my blood pressure would drop and I would get to the point where I thought I was going to pass out. Thankfully, I didn't.
Yeah, thank
They,
you. For so many reasons.
Right? They drill into you, like as a med student going through, the OR procedures, like you cannot pass out in the operating field.
Not allowed. You got to get out first. Drop in the hall.
Yes. Yeah. But I distinctly remember my preceptor asking if I happened to be pregnant because I was having to scrub out so often, which of course now that would kind of be frowned upon, but
I can't ask.
But it was memorable to now, yeah, that probably was all related.
Yeah. Shocker.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Yeah.
So you have such a unique background and practice, and I want to dig in a little bit to like allergy versus autoimmunity versus immune deficiency, because it's
we're all one human organism.
Right? Yeah. It's all
in addition to our microbes. But so when we think about our immune system, its purpose is to help protect us, obviously, against infection. Its purpose also is to help us heal, like from injury as well. So if you think about a cut that you may get, you'll get an inflammatory response at that cut. It's ouchy. First of all, it's painful. It's red, swollen, typically, and it's warm. Those are all the signs and symptoms of acute inflammation. And so, during that response, you're having this coordinated effort of cells and proteins and these things called cytokines and chemokines, like this beautiful orchestra of our physiology taking hold so that it can stop the bleeding. It can bring in the cells that are going to help repair the tissue damage. It's going to fend off any microbes from the surface of our skin that maybe have made their way in or other infection. And it's going to allow that area to heal. And it's this magical thing that happens, right? But when we think about allergy, we think about autoimmunity, and throw cancer in there too, and immune deficiency, that system, it has gone haywire. It's misbehaving. And so in allergy, our immune system has recognized something in the outside world as the danger signal, the enemy. And it mounts a particular flavor of an inflammatory response against that, whether it's a pollen or kitty cat allergen or dust mites, or in some cases foods, as we've seen in the last 20 or so years, this really steep rise in true food allergy, where if someone is exposed to this minute amount of peanut or egg, that they have a life-threatening allergic response. Now, in the case of autoimmunity, when we are incubating, when we are in mom's womb, our immune system is already hard at work determining what is self from non-self and what is safe. And so things that are too good of, like, recognized too easily, those types of cells are eliminated. And those that are not recognized self are eliminated as well, so that you end up with this immune system that can tell, okay, what is us and what is not us. And in autoimmunity, essentially the immune system loses that tolerance over time, so that then the immune system is seeing our own bits and pieces as that enemy. And it depends, each autoimmune condition has a little bit different flavor of this. It has particular targets that are implicated, and that then explains some of the symptoms we end up with. In immune deficiency, we don't have all the parts or pieces, or they aren't quite working in a perfectly coordinated fashion. So we are at an increased risk of infection, whether it be, more frequent infections, more severe infections, oddball infections that most people wouldn't have any issue with. And a lot of times the collateral damage and inflammation that occurs is not appropriate either. So sometimes there's like too much or there's too little. And so that then can expose the immune system to actually creating an autoimmune response too, because it's not cleaning things up properly. So the really obnoxious thing for many of my patients with primary immune deficiencies, especially, is that a lot of them coincide or like co-occur or occur in the same person as autoimmune disease. So you end up with autoimmune and immune deficiency in the same human. It's a real kick in the pants.
That's a
problem. You're forced, to make some really difficult decisions as a team with your immunologist, maybe your infectious disease doctor or the rheumatologist, in deciding how can we try our best to like restore balance as best we can, because sometimes you have to like tap down the inappropriate inflammation, try to boost things up the best way we can. And so that can be incredibly challenging and frustrating. And then in cancer, essentially, you have cells that have gone rogue. They are reproducing at levels and numbers that they're not supposed to. Usually there's some kind of glitch in the system, and the immune system is unable to recognize and take those out appropriately. And so what you're seeing with some of the newer immunotherapy cancer treatments is they actually turn the immune system back on to help then target the cancer more appropriately. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just
and that's
pretty cool.
I think at least in regards to cancer and the general population, I think the more we have these conversations where people can realize, like, we have bad cells all the time. We all do.
Yeah. And a lot of times our immune system sees them and takes them out, and you never know
what it's supposed to do. Right. And that's that approach of, I look forward to the day when there is a more integrative approach across the board with cancer, so that we are supporting the whole human while we are helping the body go after the cancer.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting conversation, but that to me, the key for people to start to understand is, we still need to support the body to do its job. And so there was a reason your body didn't catch those cells, I guess is what which to me ties into this whole conversation of what are the things, we can do? What is that approach? Whether we are for wellness, right? Because I'm guessing it sounds like you have people that show up, they're coming to you for allergies. And I'm guessing often they have, like you did, like I did, have issues brewing that they didn't realize were autoimmune.
Oh my gosh, yes. I would have to say, so I see patients 2.5 days per week. So I'm not totally full-time in the clinic. In part, that's how I keep my cup full.
It's awesome.
But I would say at least out of maybe those 36 patients I might see in a week, that at least probably 6 of them have specifically come in wondering about food allergies, but what they're really dealing with are gut issues. It's not like they need an EpiPen. And I would say probably a good 4 to 5 of those patients are maybe the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th opinion on their symptoms, which to me, they describe symptoms of too much inflammation in one way, shape, or form,
right?
And or dysautonomia. So issues with like blood pressure, heart rate, fatigue. Unfortunately, so I'm located in Columbus, Ohio. I work at the large university there. And we don't have anyone locally who's taken the lead on dysautonomia, which is really unfortunate. So my patients to see a specialist have to go all the way up to Toledo and wait about 2 years to get care.
That seems insane. But I get
it. It is.
Yeah.
We're in a metro area of several million people. And so
you're not in the middle
especially, we already had a lot of these folks pre-pandemic that, weren't really getting great care or great recognition. I think there's a better, more discussion about what these symptoms represent and folks seeking care. But we've also had a really, an increased prevalence of these symptoms too with long COVID.
And for listeners, and I apologize, I didn't ask this sooner.
Sorry.
Explain what dysautonomia is for people that aren't familiar.
So dysautonomia is essentially an umbrella term used to describe the automatic nervous system going haywire. So, and it could show up in all sorts of different ways, but most common, and I would say probably affects quality of life most significantly, are issues with blood pressure and heart rate. So folks may have issues with feeling like they're going to pass out, or they actually pass out, and may have issues with digestion, can have differences in how like their pupils dilate and constrict, issues with sweating. I have a few patients who will wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. Now there are some other reasons why that can be that you have to
I was going to say, you're not talking about your
not necessarily, change of life. And not necessarily blood sugar issues would be the other main thing you would think about,
Sure.
and ruling out cancer. But and they are symptoms that we've known that they exist for some time, but they are, like many autoimmune conditions, things that affect different organ systems and are not well understood, not super well researched. And so when you have a medical system that is incredibly siloed, where the cardiologists are in one space, the neurologists are in another space, the immunologists somewhere else, and we kind of stay within our groups, it's challenging to have really good coordinated care for these folks.
So well said. And you mentioned long COVID being one reason. I feel like in general, even like POTS, pandas, these kinds of things, it's that question of, are we just more aware? And so now more people, more diagnoses are happening, or is it like real food allergies, autoimmunity, autism?
No, there's more
just really more, What do you think this increase in? I mean, I have two, I still call them kids, 2 adult offspring who carry EpiPens and have, one did when he was little, seemed to outgrow stuff, and then randomly again, different allergies. It is scary.
Yeah. It's really fascinating too, because there is this really almost like not quite a line in the sand, but so I'm 39, so I'm an elder millennial, and I don't remember a single kid in my class having food allergy. My sister's 36, and I think she probably would say about the same. But you go another like 2 or 3 years, and that's when those numbers really kind of blossom, kind of those born early 90s onward. And this has been a really interesting topic of conversation at our national allergy, asthma, immunology meetings. And this past spring, the real big discussion point was one of the ways that we have conceptualized this increase over the last 30 years or so is the hygiene hypothesis, right? The reason why we're seeing more is because we're all cleaner. And that helps explain it to some degree, but it wasn't the whole picture. And so there is a physician researcher, Dr. Adkis, who is out of, I believe, Switzerland, who took kind of the center stage and really spoke a lot about the epithelial barrier hypothesis. So this idea that we have interfaces on our bodies, our skin, our respiratory tract, our gut, that are how we communicate with our outside world. And those barriers are permeable or semi-permeable. We want communication from one side to the other. That's how we interact with our environments, right? But if you have too many chinks in the armor, then you get into trouble. And so what happens when you end up with leakiness or breaks is that you see a change in the microbes that are living on that surface, and you see a change in inflammation. And a lot of times, in particular, what we talk about a lot in allergy is eczema. It's easy to see like what's going on. A little bit easier to study sometimes than gut related things, because you're not having to do endoscopies all the time.
But it is a gut related thing.
Sorry, but from like a biopsy culture standard, it's a little
easier to get to.
Easier to see and conceptualize. And but what you'll see, for instance, Staph aureus lives on our skin. It's kind of a natural commensal. It's kind of like generally a friendly-ish bug. But you see the strains and the types of toxins that they may change when that skin is inflamed. And essentially what happens is you end up with a snowball effect. And so when you have breaks in the skin, the bugs change, there's inflammation, it makes it more leaky, so on and so forth. And that continues. But as you mentioned, there's crosstalk. So you can see then changes maybe in gut microbiome and development of eczema, or you can see changes or exposures through the respiratory tract that then will increase the risk of developing something like multiple sclerosis. So there's this growing body of evidence that problems at these barriers and increased inflammation, leakiness kind of at these barriers is the issue. So then the question is, okay, what's making them more leaky? And there's a whole bunch of things. We think about how different our day-to-day lives are compared to like my great-great-grandma, who was living on the farm in northern Georgia, growing all her own vegetables, canning things. She was out with the cow and they would, kill the chicken. And even my dad, when he was growing up, he'd have to go kill the chicken and pluck all the feathers and bring it in for dinner. Like he was outside on the farm working all summer. Like they didn't have air conditioning.
Touching the earth.
Yeah. It just was totally different. And here we are, in our creature comforts. I'm in air conditioned space.
Me too.
And I have my earbud, I'm sitting, and that's not to villainize everything about our modern way of living. It's just a lot has changed, and we're seeing now the downstream effects of that significant amount, change, the different exposures that we are exposed to, rapid change in diet, increased sugar, oil, refined grains, and on the whole, we're very sedentary. We spend upwards 90+% of our time indoors. And then the newest and what Dr. Adkis's kind of, I think, pet project is looking at the role of dishwasher rinse aid, in particular, those used in commercial dishwashers. But the residue left on glasses is very damaging to the gut. And so commercial dishwashers came about late 1980s. Is that then implicated in what we've seen with increased rates of food allergy, eosinophilic esophagitis, drug allergy?
Oh, 2 kids with that when they were little.
Who knows, right? Yeah. And so, there still is a lot of work to be done to really hone in, but
and I think that's
fascinating.
A very specific product. But I think it underscores the whole exposure to toxins.
Yeah.
Right. So they're studying commercial dishwasher, but what are people using at home, even day in and day out? And
yes,
that's we could talk for another hour about that. But I do think it's this combination, and you can't. So you mentioned, the changes in our food system. The dogs are piping in. And to me, you can't separate the changes in the food system and toxins. It's the same, the bad oils, the ultra processed foods, all of that, it is toxic. And so, when I say toxins, I'm not always talking like chemicals, right? And you forget, and EMF, all the things.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think then we all probably need to sit down, metaphorically, probably,
Or stand up.
or stand up. Yeah. And just think about, what are our non-negotiables? What are the things we're willing to change? And what is our comfort level with risk too? And I think that's where more data would be helpful. But
Sure.
as I've talked a lot with my patients about the dishwasher stuff in particular. I have 3 young kids. I'm working. I have a business. I don't want to go back to hand washing dishes. So, on the flip side, I'm trying to look for generally more eco-friendly products that typically, in broad brushstrokes, things that are healthier for the planet tend to be healthier for our physiology. And similarly with the things we put on our skin, like those are easy, simple swaps and switches that.
But I love that you brought up also know what your non-negotiables are. I mean, one of the pieces, and we all need to be doing it for wellness. The smart ones are doing it ahead of time before they have any symptom they're ignoring. But one of the things I do with my clients is we're reducing that exposure, right? As we're supporting the body's detox pathways, it is a process. It's a process. There's no way you could wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to reduce my exposure. And by next week, you've done it. There's so much that we come into contact with, and that's fine. Every change is an improvement. But I had one client she was a vegan when I met her, and I was like, I'm not the one to help you as a vegan. Let's find you somebody. Oh no, just tell me what to eat. So she would eat meat. But when we were cleaning up products, I said, what kind of shampoo and conditioner are you using?
Yeah.
And I never did find out, because she said to me, that's not negotiable. Not negotiable. That for her, she loved her shampoo and conditioner.
Yeah.
She literally cleaned up every other product she was using on her body, in her home. And I'm like, great. Like, it's not about, we can't reach perfect. And B, we don't need to, is the, because sometimes we have these conversations and it can start to sound doom and gloom, and, we've got all of these hits we're taking, but we really don't have to fix everything in order for the body to be able to heal, which is, that's the exciting part, right? That's why we're here.
Absolutely. We are a resilient, amazing species that has made it this far. Perfection is sometimes, the enemy of good. Yes. And I will say, I was the first to fall down that rabbit hole not too long after my diagnosis. I doubled down. We've had a Peloton bike for quite some time, since probably like 2018, 2019.
Early adopter.
Maybe it's 2019. Anyways, doesn't matter. But
pre-pandemic
Peloton. And I was like shooting for, PRs, like, okay, like I'm going to like work out hard. I was drinking green smoothies that I was adding some superfood, stuff to. And to make a long story short, ended up with an acute liver failure from the supplement. So that's always just my word of caution of just, don't overdo it, and just be conscientious of what you're doing.
Of something good isn't always better.
Yes. And then
nothing's good for everybody either.
That is absolutely. And then I took that perfectionism and then put it totally into kind of the elimination diet game, and got really restrictive, lost a bunch of weight, which of course, as a woman in our society, was of course like, like, oh, you look great, all those sorts of things. But I ended up spending so much mental energy fixated on what I was eating, what I wasn't eating, that at a certain point, my symptoms were like rearing back. And I honestly think I was just constantly in fight or flight. It didn't matter that I was eating like a really anti-inflammatory diet and like, working out and doing these things. Like, I had to kind of address all of it. And I also just had to let go of the perfectionism. Like that was, I think,
And I think everybody, I'm sure you have the same thing. I think that the perfectionism, if we could somehow like diagnose perfectionism first, we could prevent a lot of this chronic illness.
Yeah.
Because it really does that stress level. I've yet, and it may present totally different. Like it's not like everybody you meet, you're going to know right away, but pretty much everybody that I've worked with is a perfectionist, and that letting go is such an essential healing step.
Yeah.
So
I do wonder if there are like particular personality traits that also they absolutely provided a survival advantage at some point, across our lifespan, right? But do those also like increase the potential sometimes for these conditions?
And that's what we just need to learn.
You kind of wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think. Yeah. I think for sure. I really do. It doesn't mean that if you don't care about anything, you don't get sick. I'm not saying that.
No. Just, like we talk about risk factors. Like, if you drink a certain amount, you're more apt to get breast cancer, colon cancer, like those sorts of things where you just kind of take those into account. And
yeah. So, but I love that what you're bringing to the world. And I just think, the more, anytime, especially like somebody who thinks they're just coming to see an allergist, right? Like anytime somebody can walk into a doctor's office and have contact with somebody like you who can help them understand true wellness, and the body is such a gift. So I am so grateful that you are out there in Ohio doing what you're doing. Clearly you need more counterparts in your neck of the woods.
The wonderful, wonderful thing about my position is that I get to work with trainees.
Oh, so that's fantastic.
Nearly every day there is a medical learner of one shape or another. So from undergraduates who are applying to med school, I will on occasion have them shadow with me, all the way up through our allergy and immunology fellows. We have 2 per year. And actually the season just opened for interviews. So we have, 100 plus applicants for these, 2 spots every year. It's pretty incredible. And so to be able to share my story with them, share some tips and tricks as to how to think about and conceptualize these things that we may not have all the answers to. I think as human beings, our brains really hate uncertainty.
Yes.
And that is absolutely the case with physicians as well. And to push them to get more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, I think is clutch. And to help instill and support their curiosity, I think is really important too. And what really, really needs to take place to ensure that all of us as healthcare professionals can stay curious and compassionate and kind of leaning in is we need to ensure that our healthcare professionals have wellness as well. Because if they are unable to fill their own cup, that is when you get someone who is burnt out, maybe unhappy with their situation or their job. And I would almost guarantee that you are not going to get the best care that you could get from someone who is in that state.
Sick. Like I always ask, like, why? When you look at medical school and how it's set up, it's like, why are we trying to kill people who are training to help people? And it's not just this country. Yeah. It's medical school across the board is set up that way. It just doesn't make sense. I was thinking about that with your 100 plus applicants for the 2 spots. Like every one of those applicants really needs to be filling their cup and doing stress management. It's such a high stress area. And that's a great, the flip side to that I can say is I'm not a physician, is also we need to remember that our physicians are human and they're people.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah.
They're
and we have this training of decades of, this mentality that you and I are trying to change, which is you show up at the doctor because you want the doctor to fix you, right? Like,
yes, you need a partner.
Right. We have to take
Absolutely.
responsibility for our own wellness, and we have to realize not our doctors don't necessarily have all the answers. But when you can find one like Kara, like it's gold. It really is.
Yeah.
So
there's this really cool paradigm that's been written about and talked about called Wellness 2.0, where essentially it outlines this idea of the physician is human. There is this equalization. The power dynamics between patient and physician will never be equal, right? Like there's no way to fully equalize that, just the nature of these systems, but it brings it into closer balance. And I think the more that we can lean into that is really important. But the reality is we live in a very capitalistic society, right, and money talks. So they're also, we're going to have to grapple with making the case, unfortunately, probably from the financial side of things in order to really see systemic change.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the tough love aspect of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. But the good news is that when that does happen and that the broken system finally collapses, we know, what can work and what is working.
Yeah.
So I love that. So give listeners, if you will, and it can be anything, it can be directly Sjogren's related, doesn't matter. What is one step that they can take starting today to start to improve their health?
Yeah. So I think the one thing is taking a few minutes just to sit, give yourself a little bit of that white space, that quiet, to just listen to that inner voice and what they needs. I think that is incredibly important. And I think it's really helpful to do that before a medical visit. Medical appointments, almost on the whole, tend to put us into fight or flight. And when we get into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, we may forget like what our objectives were for that visit. So jotting down some notes can be really helpful ahead of time to think about, okay, what are your questions? What are your goals? How are your symptoms really impacting your quality of life? Being able to communicate how they are showing up in showing your humanity can be really helpful, especially to maybe tug on that doc who is on the brink of burnout, or who maybe just needs that reminder that you are human and this is showing up in very human ways. So that's my
and also
what I would share.
The other piece, and because I see it a lot, and I don't think people do it intentionally. We tend to, even though we're showing up at the doctor's office for help, we do have this natural tendency, most of us, to downplay just what you're talking about. We may say, these are the symptoms, but we don't share how it's impacting our life and so it's like, oh, we said the word and then that's it. And the doctor, they're not getting like, oh my gosh, this is really impacting your life.
So I'll share a really quick example. Low back stiffness was one of the main issues that was totally impacting my quality of life. And so I could tell the doc, oh, I'm having low back stiffness. I sit down for prolonged periods of time and it's really hard to get moving again. It's worse in the morning. Yes, all that's helpful. But what really illustrates how much it was impacting my life was I was not wanting to sit on the floor to play with my young children. And that was breaking my heart.
Yep.
And so to share, that little extra nugget of this is how problematic this is, like that helps light the fire, hopefully under that person's bottom to do something about it, whether it's to refer you or get imaging or start meds, what have you, but to have some sort of action.
Yeah. I love that. Amazing. Before we wrap up, where can listeners find you? Where's the best place?
Yeah. So the best place is probably drcarawada.com. On there, I have a freebie. So the 25 things that we did in our family over the last 4 years or so to make simple swaps to like less toxic things that we were talking about, just simple, easy. Yep. I'm a Midwest girl, born and bred, and I love a good deal. So things generally are, not going to cost a ton to really help start making those changes. On there also, you'll find, so each year, the last 2 years, we've hosted the virtual Sjogren Summit. So it is we have a ton of great resources on there. And coming up this fall, we are launching a fall event called the Demystifying Inflammation Summit. So you're going to want to get on the email list so you can stay in the loop. It's going to be a free event, tons of experts across the spectrum of things of too much inflammation. So allergies, autoimmunity, asthma, gut health issues. So I'm super excited and in the weeds of planning that right now.
I love that. I am definitely signing up. Love it. Love it. Kara, thank you so much. You have given us amazing gold today.
Thank you so much. I have loved talking, and we're going to have to have you on the Becoming Immune Confident podcast so that we can hear your story too.
Yeah, I would love it. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Yes.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.